Hello and welcome to The Scoop, NANP's monthly Hot Topics educational webinar series. I'm Shannon Montoya, and I want to first remind you of a few things before we get started. These calls are recorded to listen to again at your availability on the nanp.org website, which also includes our upcoming webinar schedule. Click on Continuing Education, and to thank you for registering, you will receive a link to the recording of the webinar that will be sent out in the day ahead. You can also earn one continuing education credit for participating in the Scoop webinars by taking the corresponding quiz, which is also found in the membership area of the website. I would also like to invite you to share your hot educational topic with NANP. Are you doing great work in clinical research and applications? Have you started up a business or nonprofit and you'd like to share your experience? NANP wants to highlight all that speaks to our nutrition professional community. Just email me, shannon@nanp.org, and we'll talk more. Today's webinar will conclude with a question and answer session, so please feel free to type in your questions throughout the webinar so we can get to as many of them as possible. Today, our guest is Kathleen Bell. Kathleen is a registered nurse and holds her Master's in Science in Nursing and Midwifery. Kathleen worked as a certified nurse midwife and women's health care nurse practitioner in private practice, and also had the role of clinical development specialist in a family hospital birthing center. She's now an adjunct faculty member at the Linfield College School of Nursing in Portland, Oregon, and has taught nursing and midwifery at undergraduate and graduate level since 1994. Her extensive nursing career has focused not only in midwifery, but in maternal child nursing, consumer education, and holistic health care. She's practiced nursing in settings all over the world, and Kathleen is here to share part 2 of Feeding Our Babies webinar series. Thank you for joining us today, Kathleen. It's so wonderful to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Shannon, for the introduction, and welcome. And hello to all of you this morning who are joining us for Best Practices for Feeding Your Baby for the second half of the first year of life, 6 to 12 months. I'm just going to buzz through the objectives because if you get the PowerPoint presentation afterwards, you can read these. But today we're going to talk about nutritional requirements for the babies to grow normally for the second half of the first year. The first year of life is a time of the most rapid growth of any other time when you're alive on the planet. So nutrition is critical. We're going to talk a little bit about the differences between infants' digestive physiology versus older children and adults, and the idea of how to introduce solid foods to a growing baby in the best way. We'll cover a little bit about food allergies and sensitivities, which are very prevalent in our culture and almost unknown in other parts of the world, and overfeeding and its relationship to obesity in childhood. So just a little bit about the fact that infants and very small children are much more, have much higher body fluid water content than adults. So if babies are sick, and most of the presentation about allergies and food intolerances revolves around GI symptoms of babies not tolerating food well. If babies are sick, dehydration can happen within hours, not a day or two, but hours. Infants' kidneys are not completely finished. All of their organ systems are not functioning like an older child or certainly an adult. And so parents and caretakers need to be very aware of signs of dehydration. These signs increase in severity over time, so they can start with the baby being very irritable, very restless, and moving to the baby being lethargic, the baby's color changing, skin turgor, which means if you take a nice little pinch of skin, underneath a baby's skin is a lot of fluid, and so that tissue is like almost puffy and poofy. And so that tissue should be firm, and if the tissue sticks up in a little tent, that's diminished skin turgor, and that is a very distressing sign of dehydration. Because babies are so small and their stomach size is small, we can't rehydrate them orally very quickly, and so symptoms of dehydration need to be addressed by healthcare provider. Sometimes electrolytes are also lost in dehydration, and so they need to be replaced. I've given you some examples of oral rehydration solutions. There are many out there on the market. And sometimes, very rarely, nutrition is also required. But the first thing in a dehydrated infant that needs to happen is the baby needs to be rehydrated and electrolytes need to be rebalanced. So just as a beginning, because that's completely different than any other segment of the population for infants. I know you know what these words are, macronutrients and micronutrients. The major building blocks for growth of the body are proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. We're going to talk about that because when we take away the most perfect food for the baby, which is breastfeeding, and introduce other foods and liquids, we need to be cognizant of the fact that this baby is growing, and these macronutrients are important. All infants' needs for nutrients aren't exactly the same. That seems pretty logical. There are some babies that are very active and some babies that are much larger than other babies just constitutionally. So a person needs to evaluate the individual growth of the baby, the size of the baby, the state of the baby's health, and if the baby is well or ill. An infant's BMR is the energy needed for thermoregulation. Infants are still learning to be warm-blooded creatures and keep their temperature stable in the world. So that's its first need. It needs cardiorespiratory function and cellular activity and growth just like everybody else. So infants born at full term who are 6 to 12 months old require these things: 1.5 grams of protein a day, 95 grams of carbohydrates a day, polyunsaturated fatty acids every day, and their fat intake is fully 50% of their intake during the day needs to be fat. So it is completely different than dietary requirements for anyone else. We aren't going to tell anyone else at any age that 50% of their dietary requirements should be for fat. Because babies' brains are still developing, fats and fatty acids are key components in normal brain developments. DHA, which is docosahexaenoic acid, and arachidonic acid are long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids. As the baby's neuromuscular system grows, nerves that were born unmyelinated, which means a fatty sheath covering over the nerves, which protects them as they grow. This kind of myelinization goes on during the first year of life because a newborn baby, doesn't need to walk. And so as the baby's muscles grow and the nerves that supply the muscles grow, they need the nutrients, which are primarily fats, for this kind of growth. Most fat in breast milk, human milk, is triglycerides. A small amount of cholesterol is contained in fat, and many infant formulas don't have fat in them. That's something most people don't know, commercially prepared formulas anyway. Cholesterol is critical in human milk, and our current thinking holds that the cholesterol in breast milk stimulates production of enzymes that later on in life continue to efficiently metabolize cholesterol, which decreases the overall long-term harmful effects that cholesterol can have on the cardiovascular system. The fats in commercial formulas, and I'll talk more about commercial formulas, are modified to try and approach a similar fatty profile as that is available in human breast milk. So since the year 2002, it's required by the FDA that commercially prepared formulas that are made in the United States, they do contain DHA and ARA. Since the year 2002, that's not very long. And what I'm saying to you is that your clientele, the general public, has no idea of what the components of what they're feeding their babies most of the time. Back to my, the emphasis in my first presentation is the very best food for babies is human breast milk. And the American Academy of Pediatrics has long recommended that this be the only liquid that the baby drinks for the whole first year of life. It is the perfect food at no matter what time the baby is born, whether it's full term, no matter whether the baby is 2 weeks old, 2 months old, or 12 months old. The milk that baby's mother produces is the perfect food for the age and the digestive requirements of that child. It's fairly miraculous when you think about it. But that is the continued recommendation. So what I'm going to talk about is the introduction of what is called complementary foods, because the idea is that breast milk should continue ideally, for the baby's first year of life. The proteins that are in breast milk are casein and whey. And the ratio of casein and whey on this slide, I've got it for you here. The human milk contains these proteins in a 60-40 ratio. So they're very similar. They're not one a whole lot more than the other. Whereas cow's milk has way more casein. So the ratio of whey to casein in cow's milk is 20 to 80. So you can see that's a very big difference in the protein composition. And if you move your baby from breast milk to either commercially prepared formula or formula that you can make yourself with a base of cow's milk, you need to understand this ratio of the proteins and modify the formula accordingly so that the ratio of the proteins isn't so skewed, as you can see there. Breast milk also contains glucosamine and nitrogen-containing oligosaccharides. And glucosamine is a critical building block for connective tissue. And again, a baby who is maturing from 6 to 12 months is learning to crawl, is learning to stand up and cruise around holding onto the furniture, is learning to walk. Most babies walk around 1 year of life. All of these things require strong muscles and knees that work and elbows that work, tendons and ligaments that are doing their job. And they are built by proper nutrition. Oligosaccharides also helps keep the gut healthy because it promotes the growth of the lactobacillus in the gut to keep it a hostile environment to bacteria and fungus. So if the baby cannot be breastfed whatever time during the first year, meaning weaning occurs or there isn't breast milk supplied for the whole first year, American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that formula be used, meaning don't just change the baby from human milk to cow's milk or goat milk or some other animal milk, but that a formula is concocted, if you will. It's mixed with the idea that the infant has specific nutritional requirements. So commercial formulas can be based on cow's milk in this country. They're based on soy, or some of them are based on milk protein. Many of them are lactose-free and contain sucrose, which infants can digest because they have the right enzymes for that. They contain fat, they contain water-soluble vitamins. Some are also fortified with iron. Human milk has a lot of iron in it for the first 6 months, and then the amount of iron in human milk goes down because babies are often eating other substances that contain iron by then. The Weston A. Price Foundation website has excellent resources on how to make your own infant formula. And I'm just going to read a little bit about what this particular website says about commercially prepared formula. This article was posted in 2001 by two of their nutrition experts, Mary Enig, who is a PhD, and Sally Fallon, who has worked with the foundation a long time. And they say here that the commercial infant formulas are highly fabricated concoctions composed of milk or soy powders produced by high-temperature processes that over-denature the proteins and may add carcinogens. Milk-based formulas often cause allergies in infants, while soy-based formulas contain mineral-blocking phytic acid, growth inhibitors, and plant forms of estrogen compounds that can have adverse effects on the hormonal development in the infant. Soy-based formulas especially are devoid of cholesterol, which we talked about as being needed for development of the brain and nervous system. And they go on to say that if you're making your own infant formula, whenever possible, this formula should be based on raw organic milk from cows that are certified free of tuberculosis and brucellosis. The milk should come from cows that eat food that is appropriate to cows, which is green grass in the summer and hay and root vegetables in the winter, not soy or cottonseed meal. So there is superb information out there about how to make your own infant formula. Personally, I'm going to intersperse in this presentation what I did. My children are adults, they're grown, they're in their 30s, but I breastfed both of my children One for the best part of a year. She didn't get teeth till very late, so that was nice. The second one weaned herself at 10 months when she also learned to walk. One day she put her hands in the air, walked down the hall, and it seemed like I never saw her again. That was that. So my children never had prepared formula. They had breast milk only, and I made all of their quotes food, their baby food. So I'll talk about my own experiences with that and intersperse that with what I'm saying to you in the scientifically referenced material. So I never made infant formula for my own children. They had breast milk, and if they weren't drinking breast milk, meaning they were had weaned themselves after weaning, I still continued to provide breast milk to them in the food that I made because I continued to pump and nurse them once or twice a day in the morning or at night. There are formulas that are available for infants who are completely intolerant of cow's milk. These infants often have metabolically, are deficient genetically they're deficient in enzymes needed to metabolize food. So their dietary requirements are going to be special after they grow out of infancy into childhood. Whole milk, meaning the kind of milk that you buy in the grocery store from a cow, can be introduced after 1 year. Again, don't worry about fats. Fats are not the enemy for small babies and small children. Toddlers, which is the next stage of development after infancy, need calories and growth and fat for their growth and development. They're not growing at quite the rapid rate that infants do. Infancy is newborn to 12 months. Not quite that fast rate, but they're still growing pretty darn fast. Skim milk or reduced fat milk leads to higher solute loads in the blood, and that's taxing on immature kidneys. And small children's kidneys aren't done yet. Actually, the kidneys aren't mature until about 2 years old. Supplementation, if you are breastfeeding, what the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends is that a vitamin D supplementation begin at 6 months of life. If the breastfeeding mother is strictly vegetarian or on a very restrictive diet, there may be decreased amounts of vitamin B available to the baby as well. So that vitamin D supplementation, most of the pediatricians will recommend a multivitamin supplement that contains D. Breast milk typically provides enough iron for healthy infants who are born at term, and that iron requirement coming from breast milk is sufficient for the infant until the infant's birth weight is tripled. So that's usually between 6 and 12 months. Additional iron is not usually needed. Fluoride is kind of a hot topic. There's a lot of disagreement about if fluoride is actually necessary. Some people really believe in it. The dental community says one thing. Drinking water supply in many places in this country is fluoridated. AAP does recommend fluoride if the drinking water is not fluoridated for babies. Commercial versus homemade formulas. Oh, I think I went backwards there. Sorry about that. Going this way. A little bit about the difference between infant and adult physiology. Obviously, a very young baby's stomach is small, and so for a newborn, the stomach may be empty in 2 hours. By 6 months, the stomach has grown, the baby has grown, so it takes 3 to 4 hours for the stomach to be empty. But feedings are still much more frequent during the day. Digestion takes place in an infant in the intestines, just as it does in older children, but the lining of the gut is immature. And this is important to understand when you start to talk about food intolerances and allergies. The lining of the gut isn't really done yet. It's not, the matrix of the cellular tissue isn't sort of sewn together yet, and it's leaky, if you will. It's leaky. So it allows larger food components, which are usually the proteins, to pass into the circulation after they've been digested, but the proteins are big, so they're fairly undigested, if I'm making sense. And so those proteins hitting the circulation can stimulate an IgE response just because they're so big. The liver is responsible for metabolizing carbohydrates, proteins, and fats like in anybody else, but the liver and the pancreas aren't completely mature. So in babies who are born at term, that process can take up to 6 months. In preterm babies, that process can take longer. And because these organs are not mature, they cannot do what is needed for digestion, no solid food is recommended before 6 months. So the idea that you feed your baby cereal at 4 months is, I don't know where that came from. I don't know. People who don't understand the physiology of how babies grow. Infants produce lactase, they produce proteolytic enzymes, they produce what they need to produce at the time that they need to produce it according to what they're supposed to be eating. But again, the pancreas isn't really fully up and running for a whole year. It can take up to 28 months of life. That's over 2 years old. For the carbohydrate digesting enzymes to be fully up and running. Salivary glands don't reach maturity until 2 years. Kidneys don't reach maturity. So there's a lot that's still growing and learning what it needs to do in the baby's body in this first year of life. The baby's own immune system begins to function after 6 months, because before that, the baby's immunological function is largely dependent on breast milk. So after 6 months, the baby's full dependence on that starts to decrease because its own immunology takes over. So parents and people who are advising parents, like nutrition professionals, need to understand these things about the differences in infant digestion so that they can help in the advice that they're giving to parents about how to introduce foods. So during this time, at least in the United States, most babies are weaned. There is really no right time to wean from the breast. Every mother-baby couplet will be different. And weaning can be what's called mother-led, which means it's the mother's idea to do this, or something happens to the mother. She becomes ill, she's separated from the baby, whatever. That is a mother-led weaning. Or it can be like my second baby, it can be baby-led. My second baby, when she put up her hands in the air and ran down the hall, found the outside world and really didn't need anything to do with me anymore. And so the baby can, quotes, decide when weaning should occur. Or it can be a joint experience, which is not, it hasn't been my experience in counseling and taking care of people. It's usually mother or baby. Teething occurs during this time in the baby's life. It does not automatically mean that the baby needs to be weaned. Infants can be taught not to bite the nipple. My first baby, like I said, she didn't have teeth until about 11 months. That was great. But she had gums as hard as a rock, and at her first birthday party, we had hot dogs. She could chew hot dogs with her little hard gums. So you don't necessarily need teeth to actually bite, if you will, at the nipple. It's important that the mother spend a little time, if she can, searching through her family history of food allergies and discuss what she's going to do with her healthcare provider before she weans. So is she going to continue like I did to make breast milk to use in infant food when I was mixing up meats and things like that and needed something to moisturize them? I would put breast milk in them. My first baby would not take anything that wasn't skin, if you will. And breast milk has human tissue in it. She wouldn't suck on a pacifier, she wouldn't suck on a bottle, she wouldn't suck on anything that wasn't human. And when you tried to introduce these other things to her, she just looked at you like, what do you think, I'm stupid? I don't want this stuff. So I actually was pretty much forced to make my food for her with breast milk because she wouldn't eat anything else. So my healthcare provider was very patient with me. This was a long time ago. And he knew I was a nurse and a pediatric nurse and knew about children and understood what I was doing. And he said, I don't see any reason why you can't do this. So I made my own food and used breast milk in the food for the baby. So when the baby begins to eat other foods, when any other foods are introduced, this actually starts the process of weaning because the baby's appetite is going to change. Some of the baby's satiety needs are being met by the solid foods, so semi-solid foods that you start with, and the baby won't take as much from the breast. And breastfeeding is completely supply and demand, and the body recognizes this, the mother's body, and begins to make less milk. Breastfeedings may shorten they may be less frequent, and in essence, the weaning process has begun. I weaned both of my babies directly to a cup. My second baby would drink breast milk from a bottle, like my first baby wouldn't, but bottles are such a lot of pain. They're a lot of pain in the drain to work with. They take a lot of time, to bottle feed a baby with all of the washing and sterilizing and all the equipment that was needed, and I didn't want to mess with all of that. So I weaned both of my babies directly to a cup. Weaning can present problems, especially if it's done quickly. Again, if the mother becomes ill, if the mother is separated from the baby for whatever reason, because the mother has a huge supply of milk, and that is likely for bacteria to decide that that's a great lunch counter, and they can invite all their friends. And that's called mastitis. If the baby is biting the nipple, there's a great danger for mastitis as well, because the baby's mouth is full of germs, just like your mouth and my mouth and everybody else's mouth, and the germs in the baby's mouth can enter through injury to the nipple. Let's see. If for some reason the mother and the baby are separated during this time, and sudden weaning is forced, and mother loses, quote, quotes, her milk supply, it is very, very difficult to relactate, and it may actually just not happen, even with the kind of counseling that we have today and some of the drugs that we have for letdown. Relactation is a dicey proposition there. That being said, the other side of the coin is lactation can continue for years and years. Even if you only feed your baby once at the breast, in a 24-hour period, the breast will continue to make milk, and this is what I did. I fed my babies in the morning and at night, at the breast for however long they wanted to, and then I would pump during the day to keep my milk supply going somewhat as much milk as I needed to make the foods that I was feeding the babies. If any of you have seen the movie or read the book of Room, you'll remember that the young mother in that story continued to breastfeed her little boy in their terribly isolated, confined situation. And I think at the end of the book, the little boy was 5 or something like that, maybe 5 or 6, and he was still being breastfed. And that young mother was very, very smart about understanding that her little boy's nutrition was not good in their situation, and that breast milk was the very best food she could continue to give him for growth. Of course, his growth was stunted from bad nutrition, but she was doing the very best she could by breastfeeding him for a long time. And in other cultures, people breastfeed multiple children at the same time, and it's very acceptable. We don't do that very often in this culture. So at 6 months, baby is pretty good at feeding on breast or bottle. Feedings are short, they're less frequent. And baby starts to be his own person and be more interested in surroundings. At 6 months, the baby's growth just kind of takes off. It's a classic growth spurt time. Baby may be hungry even after feedings. And moms who are breastfeeding know when their babies are hungry because the babies have to eat. Again, get closer together again. And by 6 months, in our culture, feeding a baby every 2 hours usually doesn't work. People don't have the time for that. They go to work or whatever. It's very difficult to keep up that sustained every 2-hour, 3-hour breastfeeding relationship. So it's logical in our society that at about 6 months' time, if the babies are hungry and to keep their calorie needs up and to keep the nutrition they needed for their development, that we introduce solid foods, with the idea that we're continuing to breastfeed if that's possible in the situation. Teething, a little bit about teething. It is not possible to bite the nipple when the baby's breastfeeding and suck and swallow at the same time. The mouth just can't do all those things. So if biting happens during a feeding, the mother, if you see other mammals feeding their small offspring, and like a puppy or a kitten or whatever else, and those animals are born with teeth, by the way. Horses, goats, they're born with teeth. The mother, an animal, will actually kick the baby away. I mean, kick the baby. just like take the baby away from her. And the baby in those mammals gets the idea very quickly that that's not a good idea if they want to keep feeding. Humans are just large mammals. We don't like to be told that, but we are. And we can certainly teach our babies to do the same thing. I wouldn't recommend kicking your baby, but just firmly saying no and take the breast away so that the baby gets the idea pretty quick that if they do this, the feeding goes away. There's no more milk there. And feeding can be finished later and starting over again. And I've seen many, many mothers teach their babies not to bite. I did talk just a little bit about breastfeeding after a year. All of the organizations, WHO, the American Academy of Family Physicians, the American Academy of Pediatrics, everyone recognizes that this is a fabulous way to continue to feed young children, just that culturally this is not very acceptable here. If the baby has been bottle-fed, for periods in this first year of life, bottle feeding has a lot of other connotations besides just nutrition for baby. And the kind of sucking that babies do on the bottle is very different than the kind of sucking mechanically at the mechanics in the mouth than the kind of sucking that babies do at the breast. So babies need to suck milk in order to eat, if you will, for the first 6 months of life. But babies also need to suck just to suck, and that's called non-nutritive sucking. And their non-nutritive sucking needs can be met by sucking on something else. They suck their tongue, their fingers, a pacifier, the blanket bindings, toys, whatever. And bottles often meet non-nutritive sucking needs as well as feeding needs. So weaning from the bottle is best accomplished gradually, as is breastfeeding, weaning from the breast. Eventually, all normal infants learn how to use a cup. My first baby really liked a straw. She drank very, very well from a little small cup with a straw. And we have all those little sippy cups and tippy cups that help with this transition as well. Parents will notice that as the baby's feeding skill with cup improves, that the baby's taking more liquid from a cup than a bottle, and they're preparing fewer bottles for the baby during the day. But certainly the last feeding of the day, that bedtime feeding, whether it's breastfeeding or bottle feeding, often this is kind of the last feeding to give up in weaning a baby. The question of baby sleeping related to feeding, I don't know where we ever got the idea that if we put cereal, and cereal, by the way, is not the best food to introduce first, even though it says that in the books a lot. Wherever we got this idea that cereal would make help babies to sleep better if babies are still waking up at night, it's really our job in the professional community as nutrition professionals, as nurses, as people who work with families to support them with evidence about what they're doing, because they get a lot of information from a lot of places, the internet and their families and their other groups. Mothers need to have confidence in the decisions that they make about their babies. And solid foods before 6 months, there's no evidence anywhere in any study that says this helps babies sleep better at night. As a matter of fact, I went all the way back to 1989 study for you here that says sleep patterns are more closely related to nervous system development, this is basic growth and development of the baby, than nutritional factors. Sleeping through the night, quotes, quotes, is a developmental change, and you really can't influence it by giving babies cereals at bedtime. So when complementary foods, again, I'm going to go back to the idea that the baby is having breast milk for the first year. When complementary foods are introduced, 3 concepts should be kept in mind. First of all, that these are whole foods. These are whole organic foods. You need to go very slowly in the process and be very observant as to how your baby is tolerating what you're giving the baby. And you need, number 3, which is why I spent time on physiology, you need to respect the fact that this is the GI tract of the baby isn't done yet. that this baby is still growing and developing, and it needs time to get used to what you're asking it to do. If solid foods are introduced before 6 months, this immature GI system isn't going to tolerate it well. Baby will be constipated, baby can get diarrhea, baby will vomit, baby is much more likely to have frequent upper respiratory infections, and again, poor nutrient absorption, like I said, because the gut just isn't done. At 6 to 8 months, baby is working on learning lots and lots of things. So eating foods, drinking from a cup, understanding different cues for satiety and cues for infant satiety for hunger are related to volume in the stomach, which is, it's not the same kind of cues that adults have of the satiety center in the brain. They're simply related to how full the stomach feels versus how empty the stomach feels. So the baby has to learn different cues of feeling full and feeling empty and what that means and what to do about it. So initially, breastfeeding or formula is still making up the majority of the nutritional requirements for the baby at 6 months, and 1 or 2 solid feedings should be given a day at that time. And the baby usually shows some signs that they're ready to eat. First of all, the baby needs to be big enough. So the baby birth weight has to be doubled. The baby needs to be able to sit up straight by themselves, no props or pillows or those little circle things that they put around a baby. Unassisted, okay, can sit up straight, swallow, hold their head in a high chair. The tongue extrusion reflex, which is what young babies have as a protection against choking, if something solid goes into their mouth, they spit it right back out at you, literally, sometimes very forcefully. And that's a reflex that starts to disappear after 6 months. So if you're putting stuff in a baby's mouth and it's coming out all over everything, wait a couple of weeks before you start again, because that tongue extrusion reflex, fighting with it is ridiculous because it's a reflex. The baby can't help it. Increased hunger, we talked about that because the baby may be unsatisfied with only liquid feeding. Teeth, signs of readiness for food. It seems to make sense to me, anthropologically, that if you're going to have solid food, you need to be able to process it in the mouth, and teeth are what's needed. The baby may be able to pick up food. Eye-hand coordination has improved, and the baby can be very interested in picking up food and putting it in their own mouth. I don't know how anybody ever survived before there were Cheerios. And babies are intensely interested when other people are eating. You know, like if you have a dog, like your dog watches the food that goes from your hand to your mouth and your hand to your mouth. Babies will show that kind of interest in watching people eating and mimicking their movements of their mouth or making noise and showing that they would like food. Initial foods need to be cooked. So there's no raw food diet that's okay for a baby. And I'm just going to say that as an absolute. There is no raw food diet that is okay for a baby. And if you understand what I've told you about the physiology of the infant GI system, you will get why that is true. They need to be highly pureed because the baby cannot process the food adequately in the mouth. And they need to be diluted with liquid, and again, breast milk is best. When I made my food, I would cook my vegetables and I would mash them. And I had an infant grinder. Now that we have food processors, but I had a little handheld grinder for meats, chicken breasts and chicken livers and beef. Can be just pulverized almost into a powder and then diluted into liquid. And so I would do this, and I would make portions of food with sweet potatoes and the vegetable peas and the vegetables that I was cooking, and then I would put this gooey food, pureed food, into ice cube trays, and I would freeze the food, and so then each one of those cubes was like a single serving, because you're only serving a teaspoon or a tablespoon or two initially to the baby. And so each one of those single servings could be popped out, and you could put it in a plastic bag, you could take it with you and thaw it at room temperature in your kitchen. And I had one of those dishes that the bottoms get hot to warm the baby's food, and the baby's food doesn't need to be warmed, by the way. It can be room temperature. But this dish worked great for me because I could just pop out those ice cube sized portions of food, put it in the dish, and it would melt. Microwaving isn't recommended. You can also stick these in a plastic bag. You can stick these little ice cube portions of food under hot water to thaw them. The reason microwaving isn't recommended, like for anything else, is that it can destroy nutrients. If you delay feeding all the way up until 8 or 9 months, you don't have to do any of this stuff at all. You don't have to highly puree the food and dilute it with liquid, because by 9 months, babies usually have teeth, and babies can sufficiently chew soft foods. It doesn't have to be liquefied foods. And babies can chew finger foods. If the portions are small, you can avoid all this mess altogether. If you're going to wean from the breast or the bottle to the cup during this same time, it's a lot for the baby to handle. So you want to kind of space out what you're asking the baby to learn. So separate solid feedings from liquid feedings. That's basically what that means. AAP recommends that you begin with foods that are high in protein and fat. That's meat, right? And in many native cultures and in many places around the world, babies get meat and meat broth first as first foods, the first complementary foods to breastfeeding. So infant cereal, it says in the book, all those cereals that are little flakes that that go on belts with vitamins sprayed on them or whatever. I don't know where anybody got the idea to feed that to a baby. That's not what the baby needs first, and it's certainly not really sort of logical to think that that's what the baby needs first. High carbohydrate foods, if you understand what I told you about physiology, they're very challenging for infant digestion. They should be some of the last that are introduced. So 3 liquid feedings a day, up to about 32 ounces, and 1 or 2 solid feedings with a few tablespoons of solid foods is the way to start. And gradually, you're going to progress to decreasing breast milk or formula and more solid foods. If you follow the order, and there's no real importance to the order of how foods are introduced to the baby, except if you think about what's going away from the baby's diet. As the breast milk goes down, there's going to be less protein, there's going to be less iron, there's going to be less B vitamins available to the baby in its food supply. And so the things that you can do to introduce back into the diet is give the baby what it's being lost in the breast milk. Baby needs fat, and so I gave my babies cod liver oil. Cod liver oil contains all sorts of wonderful fat that as breast milk supply goes down or breast milk supply to the baby goes down, you can replace these critical fats with cod liver oil. And you can give it in a dropper, just like you give the baby's vitamins in a dropper. For a younger baby, and for an older baby, you can mix it in a cup or a bottle. Very, very important. If there's only one thing you learn in this presentation, it is this. Only one new food at a time should be given so that you can see how the baby is reacting to this new food. One new food. Do that for a whole week. And if the baby reacts poorly, you're going to not give that baby that same food, whatever it is, for a good month or so. Only one new food at a time. Don't give new foods if the baby's sick, because you're not going to be able to tell what's making the baby sick. Is the baby sick because the baby has a cold or a respiratory infection, or is the baby sick because of the food? Same thing if the baby's gotten immunizations. Is the baby sick from the immunization, or is the baby sick from the new food? Meats, which again were the first thing that I introduced to my children, chicken livers, chicken, lamb, turkey, beef, well cooked, pureed with broth or breast milk or water, and fed in very small servings. And then vegetables. Babies love sweets, so I introduced sweet vegetables to my babies first, and then fruits, because I worried that if I put peaches and bananas and applesauce and all the great plums and the wonderful fruits that we have available to us, that my babies wouldn't eat things like beans. So I introduced vegetables first. No salt, no sugar, no spices, cooked, pureed, or mashed. Small pieces, finger food are great. Moving then to to fruits, sweets. That was the only sweets my baby's ever had. No other sweets are recommended. No juices, no desserts, no cookies, things like that. None of those are needed by a baby. They can cause decay in the teeth that the baby are getting. They promote poor eating habits, and they're just sources of sugar with no nutrients. Whole grains and cereals were last. And my babies really, like I said, the first time they got the whole grain, it was Cheerios. If baby objects to any food, who cares? Don't do that right then, and wait a month or so and offer it again. And again, separate your solid and liquid feedings. Lots of fats for baby. So foods that have fat in it, butters, meats, coconut oil, olive oil, avocados, those are all terrific foods for babies. Eggs, I didn't give my babies eggs until after a year. Eggs are a primary allergen for many, many people. No one in my family has food allergies, but we didn't need the protein because my babies were eating meat, so we didn't have eggs for more than a year. Without a family history of eggs, you can introduce yolks alone after 6 months if you'd like. A lot of babies don't like the taste, so wait a little while and try again. Egg whites need to wait till after a year. I think I said all this stuff about restrictive diets before. So talking a little bit about overfeeding, babies that love food, it's real easy to feed a baby too much because they just keep opening their mouth like little birdies, and it just keeps going in. Some babies just take to food like ducks to water, and it's easy to overfeed them. So parents need to understand what portions are recommended, and the best place to find this is on the USDA website. The portions are small. They're only a tablespoon or two of food. And often babies are much better at telling without words when they're full, and parents aren't attuned to those signs. They shake their head, they push the spoon away, they'll throw things, and if you don't listen to that, they'll vomit up on you. So a baby that vomits all the time after it eats, there's nothing usually wrong with the baby's stomach. You're just feeding it too much. Most babies need to be between the 10th and the 90th percentiles on growth charts. And that's just a big generalization, but most babies in the United States fall there if they are adequately nourished. Some babies are just huge, constitutionally large. My second baby started out at 9 pounds. She was always in the margin on those charts. Everything about her. She wasn't too fat. She was too tall. She was too big. She had huge feet. And everything about her was just very, very big. So it's important to look at all those parameters. That being said, we do have overweight babies. And overweight babies' BMI is calculated on kilograms of weight per square meter of height. And all of the parameters needed to be looked at on those developmental charts. An overweight baby happens because the baby is being overfed. And that's really the bottom line. And so we don't restrict infants' diets, and we don't restrict children's diets either, by the way. If they're overweight, we need to educate parents. Excessive weight gain in infancy and early childhood can lead to obesity. And the rate of childhood obesity in this country right now is at an historic high. 17% of the children in this country qualify as obese, and that's over the 95th percentile for BMI. About the same number qualify between the 85th and 94th percentile as overweight, which amounts to about 1/3 of all the youth in the United States being overweight, which is unbelievable to even say. Further breakdown of these statistics indicates that very young children, 13.9, almost 14% of 2 to 5-year-olds are obese, and remember that obese is over the 95th percentile. So early introduction of foods, excessive food intake, overweight babies, increased weight at 8 months, 13, 26 months of age is related to overfeeding. I talked enough about physiology that I think you understand how food allergies happen. I didn't address breastfeeding mothers who eat a large amount of a particular food, but breastfeeding mothers can cause allergic reactions in their baby to a certain food because that protein just keeps going all the way through the digestion if the baby is young. And so mother needs to identify what that food is and exclude it from her own diet. The very best policy, second to the last bullet here, is to avoid the foods that have the most potential to produce an allergic reaction, like cow's milk products, citrus fruits and juices, eggs, wheat, tomatoes, chocolate, fish, pork, and nuts. Okay, these are the most common allergy-producing foods during the first year. And honey should also be avoided. Again, no sweeteners need to be used for a baby younger than a year. The danger of infant botulism exists because the baby doesn't have the right bacteria in their gut to combat that. What do allergies look like? Well, it depends on how serious they are. Just basic food intolerance, usually GI responses. Anything that's a respiratory or a skin sign is a little bit more severe. And a complete circulatory collapse is anaphylaxis. That would be the most serious sign of a food intolerance. Most of the time what you see is rashes, especially around the mouth. Wheezing, rhinitis, swelling, things like that. Those are much more serious signs. And the ubiquitous and very amorphous GI signs, bloating, colic, constipation, bloody stools. This is what babies get in response to many illnesses, so it's sometimes very hard to sort out what the problem is. Allergy testing can certainly be done. I know you all are aware of allergy testing. Allergy testing yields many false positives because of the test cannot distinguish between the similarities in food proteins. And lastly, I just wanted to give you just this little table of growth and development so that you focus on times to intervene and especially react to what parents need at very kind of designated times of infant development. So infant growth and development proceeds in an orderly sequence. All babies do things at different times, but there's things that we expect at certain times in growth and development. We watch the development go from head to toe. We watch the development go from the center of the baby out, and we watch development proceed from fine to gross motor. Or sorry, the other way, gross to fine motor. My very favorite pediatrician of all time authored a touch points model. And this is, again, those important times when parents need help, they need advice. It's when babies are changing rapidly. It's the very best times to do a little bit of intervention in that first year of baby's life. So our time is almost gone, but I want a few minutes for questions at the end, if we have some, Shannon.
Oh, we have a lot of questions. Let's start with this question about medicating your baby through breast milk. Do you encourage mothers or recommend at any point that they take specific herbs or supplements for their babies to distribute them through breast milk feedings?
That's an interesting question. Almost everything that's available to the mother, meaning whatever she eats or breathes or ingests in any ways, comes in some form through the breast milk. But using the breast milk as a vehicle for medication of the baby is not good because we cannot quantify how that happens. So I could never, as a nurse, say that the very best way to distribute something to a baby is through the mother's breast milk because I have no way to quantify that. And it's every single substance that you give to a baby with the idea that you're doing it for the baby, whether that's a medicine or an herb or a salve that you put on their skin or whatever, it's all calculated on infant weight. So it has to be milligrams or whatever your measurement is per kilogram of infant weight. It's very specific. It changes by the day and the minute when you have a baby that requires a substance for some reason, whether that's a medication, a vitamin, whatever. So I could never use the vehicle of the breast milk to do that because it's just simply not exact enough for baby.
Okay. Would you ever recommend coconut water to use in replacement of a Pedialyte type of electrolyte formula for rehydration?
If you go ahead and look at what's inside those formulas, they usually start with water and then they add electrolytes. Coconut water has a lot of electrolytes, so you'd have to know a lot about what you were doing. But yes, I can see that you would do that. But you'd have to know, you'd have to actually see what is contained in that coconut water and then what else the baby is deficient in.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Ingredients.
Mm-hmm.
Do you recommend probiotics for infants?
No. Again, because of the immaturity of the infant gut. Breast milk, again, is the best in the way of probiotics. And then after that, the baby's gut, if it's healthy, is going to colonize with the bacteria that it is eating. So, and initially that bacteria comes from the breast milk, and that's like the good bacteria, if you will. Okay. But that's one of the very best reasons to avoid highly processed, refined, commercially prepared foods and feed your baby whole foods, whole organic foods, because what grows in a healthy gut comes from the foods that you eat, just your baby too.
Okay, would you recommend including fermented foods to toddlers as a probiotic or a...
No. Again, because the process of fermentation creates substances that the baby doesn't have the proper digestive enzymes to break down.
Okay.
Basically.
Okay.
And that's one of the reasons why foods have to be cooked. Okay?
Okay.
Because cooking, it begins the breakdown of substances in the food that the baby can't do that yet. And a mature GI system can do that. It can break down raw food. An infant's GI system simply cannot do that.
Okay.
So the nutrients aren't going to get there. The baby will be undernourished.
Okay. And fish, do you recommend, or at what age would you recommend introducing fish proteins?
Yeah, somebody's paying really good attention because fish wasn't in that list. Whoever you are, kudos to you for paying attention. I fed my babies fish. I lived on a lake at the time when I had my babies in Ohio, so I knew what was in the water and I could catch my own fish. I also had well water then, so I knew what was in that water, and I remember was using breast milk to process my own food. But fish, because of the sources of it, fish is a highly allergenic substance, not because fish is bad. I love fish, and fish is a great protein and source of fatty acids, as you know. But you have to know where the fish is from, again. Right. So if you live on a lake, if you grow your own fish, if you know everything about what it is that you're putting in your baby's mouth, I would say go ahead. Sure, that's great. But because where we get our fish is not usually our front yard, okay? And we can't be sure of that. That's the reason it was omitted from the list. So good for you for noticing that.
Okay. Do we need to be concerned about any pancreas or gallbladder issues when we're feeding our babies with high fat content foods?
No, absolutely not. 50%, remember, fully 50% of the calories that a young child, a baby, infant from newborn to 12 months, fully 50% of their calories should be fat, because fat is the most concentrated form of energy, and the baby needs fat. We're not worried about gallstones. We're not worried about cholesterol in their arteries. All that stuff is later on in life. Okay. They need to grow, and fat is the concentrated energy source that they need.
Okay. Should mothers panic or worry if their babies are picky, fussy, they don't want to eat?
No. No. And babies have their own personalities, and they certainly have their own likes and dislikes, and they will be pretty easy to figure out if they like or they don't like. Eventually, people learn to eat what they eat, and if your baby is growing well, on the growth curve, if your baby's happy, if your baby is sleeping well, if growth and development is progressing, and your baby simply never will eat a green bean, ever, the baby won't eat a green bean, who cares? Okay? I didn't eat green beans until I was an adult, over 21. Who who cares? So no, do not panic. We have so much available to us. We're so very fortunate that we have a huge variety in the supply that's available to us to feed our babies. That is not the same all over the world. So no, mothers do not need to care about that or panic at all.
Just try other foods, variety.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Question about raw cow or goat milk. What are your thoughts on raw dairy?
Well, absolutely. Let's see, the Weston A. Price Foundation website to make your own infant formula, this is what they say. Whenever possible, if you're composing your own infant formula, this formula should be based on raw organic milk.
How?
Okay? But again, you have to know the source.
Yeah.
You have to know that these cows are eating the food that's supposed to be cow food, okay, not soy-based or cottonseed.
Right.
You have to know that the cows are clean. They don't have brucellosis. They don't have tuberculosis. They're not being fed hormones. You have to know who's making that milk, basically, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So absolutely, yes, yes. If you're going to make an infant formula and you know what, and it's from goat's milk, that's fine too. But goat's milk has different protein, whey, and casein ratio, just like the formula that I gave you for cow's milk. It's 20 to 80. Okay, well, human milk is 60 to 40. So you need to figure out, you're going to have to put whey in there. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to change the protein composition of that formula. So you do need to know what you're doing if you're going to concoct your own infant formula. But it absolutely can be done. And rather than feed commercial baby formula, I would absolutely do it. But take some time, take some study, but yes, absolutely can be done. And raw organic milk is where you should start.
Okay. One more question. We've got so many questions, Kathleen. I just can't get to them all. But one question that's standing out, what about sprouted grains and nuts? Is this a good idea for sprouted?
Not in the first year, no.
Not in the first year.
No, not in the first year. Certainly as your baby, this is a baby, okay, this is an infant, all right, up to 12 months, and you're just beginning to nourish this baby with the food that grows on the planet, if you will, and not the food that came from mom. So this is just the beginning. So you're going to develop what you're feeding your child as the child ages. This is just getting started. So not for under a year, but there's plenty of time for that.
Okay. Okay, well, we're going a little bit over. I want to thank you for staying with us, the great presentation. We've got a lot more questions. Maybe we can get you back again. We've had such great responses from your webinar. So thank you for joining us and giving this information.
Is it all right to give my email to the people that have the questions?
Absolutely. Please, yes, give your email and contact. Absolutely. Go ahead. Go for it.
Please do that. You can email me at kbell@bellsoft, all one word, BELLSOFT.com, for further questions, because I know that we're out of time, but I hate the idea that people who are interested enough to ask questions don't get an answer. So please do that, and I will answer you.
Right. One more time, Kathy.
kbell@bellsoft, BELLSOFT.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, well, we're going to wrap up our webinar today. Thank you for joining us, Kathleen Bell, with this wonderful information. I want to remind everybody that to mark your calendars for next month, Thursday, February 9th, where Sarika Cernahouse, licensed acupuncturist, and Jap Tips, PhD and clinical nutritionist, will be here to present on optimal food factors. Mark your calendars, February 9th. I look forward to seeing you then, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.